Hello, I am Nika Harper. I am an author and I wrote a story specifically for Halloween. I would love to share it with you. It is called 13 to 31. Day 13. Simon walked past the pumpkin for the second time that day. It only caught his attention because it seemed abandoned. It wasn't carved, didn't sit anywhere in particular. No other decorations surrounded it at the middle of the courtyard. Was someone giving it away? Was it possibly a lazy attempt at being festive? Day 12. He saw the pumpkin had been carved, finally, and now sat with two others in the same haphazard spot across from his apartment. Mystery somewhat solved. Still looked out of place, but the carvers seemed skilled at their work. Simon had never felt uncomfortable about jack-o'-lanterns before, but the middle one's carved face looked strange. He couldn't decide why, but he unpacked his groceries and shot looks furtively out the window. Nothing would change, of course, but he drowned his worries in making pancakes and sausage for dinner. His roommate might be pleased, if he didn't come home full of fast food or takeout. Simon cooked and watched in the same breath. The pumpkins never moved, but who was he to expect it? Day 11. There were more. Of course there were. His roommate was out. A consistent office job demanded a schedule, even if his did less so. Simon saw more pumpkins, which was fine, really, getting into the spirit of things. The previously unmarred pumpkin had new faces, and yet they were still all pointed towards his apartment. It's probably the neighbors above, he thought, spreading the festive nature of the holiday. As he cooked pancakes, again, at noon, he watched out the window to see who changed these gourds to face him. It just didn't feel right. Simon went back to bed in the afternoon to right his mood. He woke in the night to see lights dancing on his walls from the candles outside. They were almost calming, like traffic lights. Day 10. Tomorrow came too soon. Pancakes again. Was that too much? Simon had to go into the office and check in some work, so he bustled around and got the task done. Pumpkins already looked less threatening in the daylight, soggy things full of wax that wrinkled the sides already. Didn't anyone understand molecular decomposition? Against his better moral judgment, Simon twisted the jack-o'-lanterns to look elsewhere. To the left, to the right, off to the distance beyond the gate. Give them a bit more fun, after all. It must be frustrating staring at one thing day and night, especially if that is his undecorated window. They were all twisted upon his arrival that night, through dinner, and until bed. But the lights in his window flickered again. Simon peered out to see all of the pumpkins peering back at him. Every single one. Their orange glow tickled the walls of his room. The middle one, the original cruel-faced pumpkin, flickered vaguely green. Day 9. Someone was talented, and perhaps living above Simon's apartment. Who was this mysterious carver? He drafted a quick memo asking for an expert pumpkin designer for his own creation, perhaps. On the bulletin board it went, and in the mail slots of a few very specific doors around his place. There were more pumpkin faces pointing his way today. The courtyard was rippling with stems of new pumpkins, like tiny gangs and loiterers. The candlelight shining in the window that night was so distracting, Simon considered buying blackout curtains just so he could sleep again. Day 8. No takers on the flyer. The older jack-o'-lanterns were curling up into themselves. Some hinted at rot and mold. Most were still fine. There were many fresh ones joining the bunch. Their creator must be very dedicated. Simon looked up from his shopping list to see a decorative plastic pumpkin laying down from the grocery aisle. It was the only pumpkin of the bunch that had a carved face, and it looked just like the one outside of his door. The same simple but markedly upsetting shapes and asymmetry. He took a picture on his phone. The internet had no leads about mysterious pumpkin carvers. In his mind, Simon romantically considered that there was a mad anarchist artist carving pumpkins all around town, like a Halloween Banksy. Nobody else had reported it anyway. He ended up searching medical sites for evidence of disturbed sleep leading to the sour feeling in his stomach, but results were inconclusive and usually pointed to cancer. He cursed his lack of dark curtains. The candle shadows made his stomach lurch like he was on a boat. Day 7. Simon fought to not be late for his last-minute doctor's appointment, but it just seemed like that kind of day. Reaching out to lock his door, he felt the key slide out of the way. The lock had been covered and crusted with milky white wax. It took a few minutes to dig out. Stomach problems were not uncommon in times of stress, and his doctor prescribed him acid reflux pills and good tea. Simon hated tea. The only effect it had was increasing his rate of using the bathroom and seeing the glowing faces in the courtyard. Day 6. It took a while to get out of bed. The nausea was worse. Taking out the trash, Simon decided to breathe through his mouth to avoid the smell of decay. Reaching the dumpster, he wondered what could cause such an odor. But the back alley of the building smelled perfectly normal. It was all in the courtyard. A strong stench of rot wafted from pumpkins that used to have faces and shapes. Now many were deflated, devoured, and blurred by mold. How could anyone let this happen? Not his problem, though. The bulletin board made no mention of it, nor did any neighbors. Standing tall and central, the sharp grin of the first pumpkin remained fresh. Tiny communal flower pots around the complex added a much-needed splash of color to the courtyard, their lackluster contents now overrun by bright green vines. At least someone put all those extra seeds to use. His roommate didn't have a problem with a couple pumpkins in the complex, but Simon wondered what the hell he considered a couple to be. There were at least 20 now. Abandoning the tea, Simon was nonetheless kept awake as his stomach gurgled through the night. Day 5. Halloween never seemed to fall conveniently on a weekend, so Simon's friends were celebrating a few days early in their house across town. Donning a cheap vampire costume from previous years, he skirted around the makeshift pumpkin graveyard and arrived at the party with some beer in hand. The house was decorated, beautiful as usual. They took parties very seriously, and his friends spent hours decorating. After his third beer, Simon's stomach protested. The night wore on more soberly than he had wanted, setting into quiet midnight conversations on the patio, lit orange with glowing fairy lights. They congratulated their hostess on a great party. She smiled and took a sip of her cocktail. What I want to know is, who brought the pumpkins? Over Simon's shoulder, on the far side of the yard, he saw that familiar, daunting grin. He slept on their couch, pulled the curtains closed tight. He was sober enough to drive, but if he was honest, he didn't want to return to his apartment in the dark. Day 4. Some of the party stragglers woke up with Bloody Marys, some with simple black coffee. The patio smelled like cigars and fresh morning air. Simon sat outside with a mug in his hand, locking eyes with the improbable pumpkins perched on the grass. They stared hollowly back. It finally felt like autumn. He took a sip of his coffee and felt something brush his lips. Floating on the surface, there were 3 fresh pumpkin seeds. He didn't look at the courtyard when he got home. He didn't look out the window. He got into his bed and closed his eyes deliberately. The light was bright enough to shine through his eyelids. Peeking slightly, a grim, flickering green face was on the windowsill. Simon slept on the couch. Day 3. Snow shovel in hand and garbage bag tucked into his belt, Simon was exhausted and ready to make some enemies. Fuck you, player of tricks and carver of gourds. Fuck you for letting your pumpkins rot and interrupting someone's sleep. It was over. Every pumpkin went into the bag, whether fresh and gleaming or a puddle of mold. He jammed his shovel into their faces, flattening and cutting them apart with impunity. Sometimes he got new bags. Nobody saw nor cared to stop him, but it was a public service. The courtyard was filthy from remnants of stringy, once orange squash guts. That was good enough. Somebody probably got lazy and didn't clean their own mess. Whatever, not his problem. The greenish grin, the leader, was last. The thick orange rind crunched satisfyingly under his shovel and dumped unceremoniously into the bin without further thought. Simon slept in his bed that night and didn't see flickering lights. His stomach felt knotted and sour. His nostrils were lined with that putrid smell. Day 2. Sleep was well earned. His roommate was already gone. Simon toasted a bagel and opened up the package of cream cheese. 2 moldy black pumpkin seeds lay under the foil. His head snapped up and stared out the window. The courtyard was full of jack-o'-lanterns, like they had never left. In the dead center, staring right back at him, was the same sagging eyes and sharp smile. Simon hunched forward and vomited into the sink, reddish remnants of his dinner mixed with chunky bile and water. In the mess of sick, there were 2 bright green sproutlings. He locked himself in the bathroom all day and night, trying to heave out anything he had inside him. Day 1. The receipt read $62 plus tax. Their carved faces stared at the lobby door as he got back, all waiting for him. Through the glass window back in his apartment, they had moved to stare there too. He took his stomach pill, chewed an antacid, and poured the jug's liquid into a tall glass. The bucket in front of him caught most of his sickness the first time, but the second stayed down longer. The third seemed easier still. He had gallons. Nothing came up but the herbicide, so Simon tried again and again. Day 0. The neighbors had called about the smell. His roommate got home and the stench was so thick it was almost visible. He must have been there for days or weeks. There was almost nothing left to find. Like Simon's body had melted into a puddle under that blanket of mold. He was an outline on a bed and little more. Outside, the vines in the flower beds flourished. Thank you so much for listening and watching and perhaps reading along, as you can do on my Tumblr, which is nikaharper.tumblr.com. Of course, this was made for the show Wordplay, so if you haven't checked that out, maybe you should give it a try. Also, if you liked the story that I'm telling, please support me on Patreon. It's a great way of showing the artists that you love the most that they can do the things that they love. Have a happy and devious Halloween. Thank you for listening.